So for those of you that have been around for a little while, you'll know Sue and Steve, who are part of the leadership team here. And they have just come back with a group from Uganda, and they've been going for many, many years. And we've got a real privilege today, and they're going to come and share with us some of their experiences of the last 3 weeks. 3 weeks. A round of applause.
Right, I've warned Steve that he mustn't ramble on because we've got 10 minutes. So, yeah, she's timing us. So for those of you who don't know about the school, I put something on your tables. I'll talk a bit about that in a little while. But we've been the church here has been mission partners for a school in Uganda that was started by the Reverend John and Alice Tumasimi back in the late 1990s. And they were concerned about the number of children that had lost their parents through AIDS, because as you remember, it was rampant through Africa at that time. So they didn't have any money themselves. John had a bit of land and he started a school. And they started a school with 4 orphans whose parents had died and came to them and said that they didn't want to go back, they wanted to stay there. They had 4 children themselves, they had nothing basically, no agricultural land, but he did have a little piece of land. And what they did was they started a school. So keep it quite brief. They started a school that now has, this year when we were there, 724 pupils. It's a nursery school and a primary school. And God is really working there. And we wanted to tell you some of the things that God has done there through the money that He also generously gave us before we went. And also how God works and how important God is for them. And we think, in this country that we've got everything. They have nothing, and yet they're much happier than we are in general. So there's definitely a lesson there for us. So we're going to tell you a little bit about the school and some of the things we did, and then I'll finish off. Or Steve's going to anyway.
Afternoon, everyone. It's going to be so hard to keep to a time limit for me. I waffle. As Sue said, we've been going for many years now, and Sue didn't mention, but when we first went there, we thought, what can we do for the children and for the school? And what can we teach them? We actually didn't do a lot. We come back so much richer for what the teachers and the children taught us. Not just how they learned education, but their love and trust in the Lord. It's unbelievable if you was out there, and hopefully next year when we go, some more of you will come with us. Can you have the first slide, please? A few years ago, we was over there, and we always take a little bit of extra money, which people at St John's, our friends and family, give us to spend on projects over there. And I think it's about 6-7 years ago, the teacher at nursery school, head teacher Lois, she said, we desperately need some mattresses for the young children to sleep on. They're 2, 3, 4 years of age. And that was the mattresses we actually purchased about 6 years ago. As you can see, they're a bit threadbare now and a bit rough. So she said this time, if we had any money, could we buy some more and some chairs? Next slide, please. And so there was 20 more mattresses we managed to purchase and some chairs. So the children can have a sleep in the afternoons, because it's quite hot out there, and they are young children of 2 and 3 years of age at school. Next slide. That's the head teacher of the nursery school receiving the mattresses and the 20 so chairs for the children to sit on as well. And there's probably about 150, 160 children in the nursery school, ranging from the age of 2 to 4 and 5. Next slide. That's some of the children. There's a video with sound.
Can you put the sound on?
That was a thank you for everything that we provided from this year. This slide, when we go there, all the children in the school know us as the donut people or the bread rolls people, because we always make a point of making them bread rolls or donuts. And it's the money that you provided that pays for it. It's roughly about £400 to £500 just to make the rolls or the donuts. And that's some of the class P6, which are probably about 10, 11 years of age. And it's tradition that the P6 always come and they make the rolls. Then we cook them, then we distribute to the school. And this year we managed to give some to the deaf school and to another school locally, which one of the Catholic sisters, Sister Bonnie, has started, because they have no money at all. So there's some of the bread rolls, some of the donuts there. And donuts are the hardest ones to make, it's so hot. And that's our friend Everest starting to cook them.
He fried 1,500 of those in that little pan.
Let's do cook the slides. Yeah, there's 1,500 donuts all fried, and they was going to 10 o'clock at night doing them. And there's some of the children enjoying them in the class at about 5 o'clock at night. Next slide. Another thing, that's a generator, that powers the school, because quite often the school has no power, so we rely on a generator. And the guy who does the maintenance, Henry, he says to me, it's really old, and there he is, it's really old, we really need a new one. So I spoke to Teacher Jeffrey, the headmaster, and I said, would you like a new generator? And luckily enough, because we're both trustees of the charity as well, Sue and I, and we had 2 more trustees with us, as well as Lindsay from here. And Judy's son works for an engineering company, and they give us £500. So we used that £500 to buy a new generator, and so we're bits and pieces of the school. So the school now have a new generator. Next slide. Toilets. Oh, here we go. As you know, we raised quite a lot of money. I think it was about £11,500 about 3 years ago for toilets. And they were due to start, and COVID kicked in, so it was all delayed. So they built part of the toilets, that's some of the toilets, but they had to stop because, in their words, they had an earthquake. And it's not actually an earthquake, it's subsidence in one area. So they couldn't actually build the toilets where they wanted to until it all settled. So while I was there, the builder came out, Martin, and they're starting to work on brand new toilets now. But they're still got to keep them ones there because we have paid for them as well. Next slide. This is the chapel when we're in the mornings on a Sunday service.
Okay, so that'll give you a flavour of the chapel. So you can see how much those kids really enjoy their worship. And it's right across the board. You don't see any of the kids just sitting there or not worshipping. And they've got a lot to teach us, I think. And one of the things that we found this time is that things are bad here. They are, and I appreciate that, but things are worse there. A lot of the time they're struggling to buy food for the school. The school's funded by sponsorship for some of the children who are mainly orphans, either single orphans or double orphans. Single orphans means they've lost one parent, double means they've lost both. Or they're living with extended family. And one of the things that we noticed this time was how much they were struggling. Now, I'm not going to make any apology. I said we're trustees. On your table you will find something. I went out there, I managed the sponsorship programme. I went out there with 20 children to sponsor left, and I've come back with 110 because things are so dire out there. So I've left a leaflet on each of your tables. If you feel that you could sponsor a child, it's £20 a month. If you can't afford that yourself, maybe you could join with your house group or something like that, but it would really help the children. It pays for their uniforms, it pays for their school fees. And yeah, it pays towards their food as well. So I know a lot of you are all doing it already, so I really want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for doing that. But if you haven't done it yet and you feel you'd like to, then please see one of us afterwards. There's so much to say about our trip. If you want to speak to us about it afterwards, then please do. We can't really go into all of it. We had 10 minutes, so hopefully we stuck to that. I don't know. But we really want people to come out with us. Part of it is mission. We like to take people. If you'd be interested in coming out next year with us, we're not sure if we're going in June or October yet, but we will be going, and we'd love to see you, and they would love to see you. They're forever saying, when is my sponsor coming? So, thank you for everything.
Thank you so much, both of you. That was really, really interesting. It's such an amazing place. If you ever have the opportunity to go, you will be so blessed. You think that you're going to kind of help them, but it's the complete opposite. They make a real difference to you. It's really quite heart-wrenching, actually. Right, we're now going to have Lindsay, who has also just got back from Uganda. So if you do speak to Lindsay afterwards, that is all she's going to be speaking about. And she's going to come and do our reading for us. Thank you.
She laughs, but it's true. That is all you're going to get out of me. I'm obviously not Christina, so unlucky for you guys. Luke chapter 22, verses 47 to 53. While he was still speaking, a crowd came up, and the man who was called Judas, one of the 12, was leading them. He approached Jesus to kiss him, but Jesus asked him, "Judas, are you betraying the Son of Man with a kiss?" When Jesus' followers saw what was going to happen, they said, "Lord, should we strike with our swords?" And one of them struck the servant of the high priest, cutting off his right ear. But Jesus answered, "No more of this." And he touched the man's ear and healed him. Then Jesus said to the chief priests, the officers of the temple guard, and the elders who had come for him, "Am I leading a rebellion that you have come with swords and clubs? Every day I was with you in the temple courts, and you did not lay a hand on me. But this is your hour when darkness reigns." Now I'd like to invite Danny up to speak more on this passage.
Afternoon, everybody. Good to see so many people here today. So tomorrow is Halloween, but tomorrow is also Reformation Day. Now, Reformation Day was over 500 years ago that Martin Luther confronted the church about the foundation of Christianity and the foundation of faith. And this was because people had got it into their heads that you had to earn your way to God. You had to earn his love, earn his approval. And this is completely wrong. And what Luther stood for then is as important then as it is today. And that is that you are saved by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. So today we're going to look at this passage that Lindsay just read to us, and it's a passage where Jesus is in the Garden of Gethsemane. And it's a moment of heightened anxiety, heightened tension. A crowd has come to arrest Jesus with torches and clubs. And this is the same garden that about half an hour or so before, Jesus had been praying to the Father, asking him to take this moment away from him. It was a time of spiritual and physical agony. We're told that Jesus actually sweat blood because he was that anxious. And while all of this was going on, his friends couldn't stay awake for him. His friends fled. Judas betrays him. The soldiers take hold of him. And in an attempt to stop all of this, we have one disciple who tries to fight back. The fight back is on. He slashes the ear of the servant of the high priest. And if we were watching a film of this, we would be rooting for this disciple. We'd be sitting on the edge of our seat, willing him to fight back and to defeat the enemy and to save Jesus. But what happens after this confounds our understanding. This is not how this story goes. And if we were writing this story, we would not write it in this way. The build-up reaches crescendo as the disciple cuts off the ear, but then Jesus brings it to a swift end. He says, "Stop, enough of this." The fight back is called off, the anger is subdued, and in this moment, peace enters in, healing enters in to this moment. And it's not the healing of anybody, it's the healing of an enemy. And his name is Malchus. And Malchus was a slave, a servant of the high priest. His presence there on that night indicates behind the scenes the high priest's machinations to eventually condemn Jesus and have him executed. The religious elite, the rulers, the high priest, all that were associated with him wanted Jesus dead. And this was mainly because Jesus did not fit their expectations. He was the antithesis of what they wanted or what they believed in. And in this moment, where he heals Malchus, this is on display for everybody to see. This different Messiah, the Messiah that comes to heal. When it comes to an enemy, when we're confronted with an enemy, by our nature, we don't want to heal. We want revenge. We want justice. Jesus' healing of Malchus turns this on its head. Jesus knows who Malchus is. He knows everything about him. He knows that he's come to kill him. He knows his individual sin. He knows all the wrong and the deficiency in his life. And yet he still heals him. And he does this knowing the full extent of the horror with which he was going to be facing a few hours later. He was going to be on the cross, dying. Now this really reveals the unparalleled love of Jesus. It's a love on a higher plane. It's a love that knows no bounds. It's a love for enemies. Now consider what must have been going through his head. He'd had a sleepless night. He'd been up all night praying for God to take this situation away from him. His friends were not there for him. They all flee. A violent gang comes to arrest him. He's betrayed. And one of his disciples starts a violent breakout. But in the middle of the storm that night, he doesn't consider his own feelings. He considers the feelings of the one that came to kill him. Now, in that shows you the difference between Jesus and all of us. Jesus, there's no one like him. He is unique. In that moment, he possessed all the power to finish those guards. But what does he do instead? He uses power unlike how we see power used today by many leaders. He uses power in the way to heal. He restrains judgment. He calmed storms. He rose people from the dead. He healed the blind. But what he does here is he shows love. He does not condemn. He shows mercy instead of judgment. And that's because at his core is love. Everything that he does proceeds from love. He is, of course, the God of justice as well, and he is he does care about eradicating injustice and evil, but we'll come to that. How he manages to square the two. Now, the other key person in this passage is, of course, the disciple that cuts off Malchus's ear. This event is recorded in all 4 Gospels, and that's a strong indicator for the truthfulness of this event, because this would have been an embarrassing event for the early Christians to admit to, that one of them caused violence, one of them struck out in violence. The very fact that it's there shows you that it was true. And only one gospel identifies who this disciple was. And it's a fellow disciple, John, that has no problem in calling out Peter. And he does something that all friends, all real friends, should do. Call out people for the wrong that they do, but call them out in love. Now, if you know anything about Peter, you know that he's a disciple whose faith was a bit of a train wreck. Throughout the Gospels, he's shown as not listening to Jesus, not getting the point at all. Elsewhere in the Bible, in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul actually calls him out for hypocritical behaviour. He's impetuous, he misses the point. And in the garden, he misses it big time. Consider that Peter had a front row seat to Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where Jesus said, "You have heard it said, love your neighbour and hate your enemy. Yet I say to you, love your enemy and do good to those that persecute you." Now fast forward, and what do we have? Peter not dealing with an enemy in this way. He cuts off Malchus's ear. This moment of violence, ironically, might as well be a picture into Peter, and he might as well have walked around for 3 years with both of his ears cut off, because not much has sunk in. I don't want to be too harsh on Peter, because actually that's the same story for all of us. We hear all the time, but little actually goes in. How do we act with enemies? What do we do to them? How do we talk about them? Are we walking in the way of Jesus, or are we walking in our own way? Are we guilty of not acting with love? And how does Jesus react to Peter here? He tells him to stop it. He tells him to drop it. Is there anything that we need to drop today? Is there anyone that we have an issue with that we need to bring healing into this moment? Jesus famously says in Matthew's Gospel, after this event, "Those who live by the sword die by the sword. Violence breeds violence. Hate breeds hate." It's a vicious circle. And this is the one that we see operating in the world today. We need to get off of that merry-go-round. In the garden, Jesus counteracts the violence Peter perpetrates. He comes against the cycle of inflicting pain and suffering and brings the pattern to an end. See, there's greater significance here. Where does this happen? Where does this event happen? It happens in a garden. And it's reminiscent of another garden in the Bible, and that's the Garden of Eden, the original garden where humanity fell, where sin entered into the world. And in this garden, however, on this night, Jesus is on a restoration mission. He's making all of the old order come untrue. He's restoring someone's humanity in the garden. He's making Malchus whole. He uses this point here to bring glory to God. An enemy is healed, and he's going to be a witness to the grace and mercy of Jesus. Now, there's a tradition that Malchus actually became a follower of Jesus in the years after Jesus' death and resurrection. Now, we can see that that's quite easy to sort of maybe believe, because a demonstration of that sort of power would make you sit up to who this person is. He'd experienced radical love, where people intend to harm and punish. God intends grace. His ordering of Peter to stop the fight back was because Jesus knew where he was headed. He was headed to the cross, to his death, and this was not to be thwarted. His death was necessary. See, the only reason why Jesus can show grace and mercy to Malchus in the garden is because he would take the punishment that Malchus deserves. And not just for Malchus, not just for Peter, but for me and for you. See, the New Testament reveals to us that by nature we are all enemies of God. Our sin makes us enemies. We by nature don't want anything to do with him. We want to shut him up, arrest him, lock him away, kill him, get him out of our lives. And the Apostle Paul says that we were once enemies of God, but we've been reconciled by his Son. We all start off being estranged and lost to God. He, though, shows us relentless love. He comes after us. His love is brought to a climax in his death for us, and it turns us from enemies to friends and to children of God. Jesus is able to heal wounds, severed ears, disobedient followers, because the prophet Isaiah says, he was pierced for our transgressions, crushed for our iniquities. The punishment that brought us peace was on him, and by his wounds we are healed. It's an interesting thing to consider that after the resurrection, Jesus kept his wounds. His body was transformed, but he kept his wounds, the holes in his hands and his feet. Why? Because they're a symbol of his love. He carries them around forever because our debt, by his death, paid for us. The holes in his hands and feet validate this. He's not ashamed of these wounds. These wounds show us that he loves us. These wounds are our names engraved on his hands and his feet. Every single one of us in this room. He's a king who is not ashamed to give his life for others. He wears the wounds proudly. They're for you. His love is transformative, and true change in our lives is a product of this love. And it's a love that we're to receive freely. God's love can often be a phrase that can be empty to us. We hear that so many times, and we've heard it in so many places. We see it in so many places. The problem is we don't understand that. When we hear God loves you, we don't truly understand what that means. The sheer reality and depth of his love and the type of love we're talking about. Now consider the worst thing individually. Consider the worst thing that you have ever done. Just think about that for a moment. Hold it in your mind. It might be something that you've not told anybody else. Now, do you know Jesus knows what that is for each one of us here? And he still looks at us and he says, I know, but I love you. Son, I love you. Daughter, I love you. When all others would move away because of what you've done, Jesus moves near. Now, this is what marks out Christianity and Jesus from all the rest, all other belief systems, including atheism. In every other system, you have to work your way for approval. You have to earn love. You have to do better, try harder. We currently live in a world that's dominated by something called cancel culture. People are finished if they do something wrong. And this isn't true reality. This isn't reality at all. Jesus is the exact opposite of this. Do you know, Charles Spurgeon once said, "Don't come and bring your strength or your good works to God. He's got those in abundance. Come and give him your weakness. He has none of that." There's people here today, there's people that we know that don't feel like they measure up. They've made a hash of things. They've lived a life far away from Jesus. They're enemies of God. But yet, he died for them, he died for me, and he died for you. He took that sin, that guilt, that shame upon himself, and he wants to wash you of it. He doesn't want to hold it against you. He wants to heal you of your wounds. He wants to set you free from the thing that tortures you. He wants to serve you. He wants you to experience his love. He marches towards the cross for me and for you. You know, there's a saying, cross on his back, crown of thorns on his head, you on his mind. When we understand grace and what's been shown to us, we can't withhold it from other people. I know it's difficult, I know it's hard, but we can't. No one deserves it. Not me, not you, but everyone is offered it. We don't work for it, we don't earn it. It's unconditional love. We are called to radical love. You know, years after this event that we've heard about, Peter wrote a letter to the early Christians, and he began that letter, Peter, a servant of Jesus Christ. And in another of his letters, where he must have had this incident in mind, he spoke about Jesus and he said that he did not revile when he was reviled. He did not strike back when he was struck. See, this episode here transformed Peter. He was transformed because Jesus never gave up on him. The wayward disciple who always got things wrong eventually became someone who could see, someone who was transformed, and a chief leader in the church. And this is the hope for every single person here today. We can be forgiven, we can be transformed. And that's by grace alone, through faith alone, in Christ alone. And now we'll have prayer. Thank you.